On-screen text. The webinar will begin shortly. Questions/comments. Share questions and comments in the chat window on the right side of your screen. Questions will be reviewed during the Q&A period. Closed captioning. Streamtext.net/player. Event equals NIH 328,557. Zoom technical support. 1-888-799-9666 extension 2 or support.zoom.us/hc/NUS. Feedback. Let us know what you thought of this presentation. bit.ly/38nc. Join the conversation at Mcats_NIH_gov. #Mcasper.
Okay, we're at the 2 o'clock hour. Just wanted to make sure everyone is back and ready. We're about to go live. Make sure you get your last drinks of water. If you're not speaking, turn your mute off. Great. Thank you, everyone. The webinar will begin shortly. I'm going to move to record. If you have questions or comments, please share your questions in the chat window on the right side of your screen, and the questions will be reviewed in the Q&A period. This is going to be a slightly modified session. We're going to have this more as a panel. So you'll hear an interactive discussion with our experts here today. I did want to note that we're offering closed caption and Zoom technical support. And we really want to know what you have to say about what you want to see in the future. So please offer your feedback and join the conversation. You can follow us on our Twitter handle and follow the NCATS SBIR hashtag.
A decade of innovation, how Mcats is impacting translational science through small business growth. December 8, 2021.
And now it's my honor to officially welcome you to the 10th anniversary of NCATS SBIR program, A Decade of Innovation, how NCATS is impacting translational science through small business growth. Next slide, please.
Featured speakers. Headshots of Chris Gibson, Ph.D., co-founder and CEO Recursion Pharmaceuticals. Cheng-Hee Kim, Ph.D., CEO. GoDX, Incorporated. Lena Wu, Ph.D., co-founder and former CEO and president, Antabio, Incorporated. Lily Portilla, MPA Director, Office of Strategic Alliances, National Center for Advancing Translational Sciences, National Institutes of Health. Moderator.
Today, we're going to hear from real live experts who have successfully navigated the program and have created wonderful startups and are advancing along different milestones. You'll hear from Chris Gibson. Dr. Gibson is the co-founder and CEO of Recursion Pharmaceuticals. We also have Dr. Cheng-Hee Kim. Dr. Kim is the CEO of GoDX, Inc. We also have Dr. Lena Wu. She's the co-founder and former CEO and president of Antabio, Inc. Our moderator and lead today is going to be Lily Portilla, who is a director of Office of Strategic Alliances at the National Center for Advancing Translational Sciences. Before we get into our full presentation, next slide, I wanted to give you a quick overview of what we're going to be talking about today. So you'll hear a little bit of an intro from our panelists, how they've leveraged the program, and Lily's going to kick us off on a discussion and fireside chat. And then we will have a moderated Q&A. So we have accepted some of the questions we received during registration. I've considered that for the panel discussion. But if you have any questions that you think of during this discussion, please use the Q&A feature and you'll be able to send your questions in and we'll ask them at the end of the event. We are recording this session and we'll be posting it on our site. Next slide, please.
NIH SBIR/STTR is a three-phase program. 1. Discovery. Phase 1 feasibility study. Budget guide, $256,580,000 for SBIR and STTR open brace, $325,000 waiver close brace. Project period, 6 months open brace SBIR close brace, 1 year open brace STTR close brace. 2. Development. Phase 2 full research/R&D. $1.7 million for SBIR and STTR, over 2 years open brace, $2 million close brace. Fast track combines Phase 1 and Phase 2. Direct to Phase 2, allow to skip Phase 1. Phase 2B competing renewal/R&D clinical R&D, complex instrumentation/to FDA funding varies open brace approximately $1 million per year close brace for up to 3 years. 3. Commercialization. Phase 3 commercialization. NIH, generally, not the customer. Consider partnering an exit strategy.
With that, I'm going to turn it over to Lily Portilla. We want to make sure everyone is grounded in the basic elements of the SBIR and STTR programs and how they can help your small business.
Thanks, Monique, and good afternoon, everyone. I just wanted to spend maybe 5 minutes going over a few things with the program, and especially since we may throw these terms around during our conversation with the panel. SBIR is a 3-phase program that, not to be confused with clinical phases, but the phase 1 of a SBIR grant typically includes feasibility studies. And there are program budget amounts that you can ask for. There's a hard cap that we have listed here, but NCATS does allow for higher budget dollar amounts for certain topics. And projects usually last anywhere between 6 months to 1 year. Phase 2 is full R&D research. The NIH hard cap is 1.7, but we do allow, again, higher budget dollar amounts at NCATS for certain topics. And projects typically last anywhere between 2 to 3 years. There's something called a fast track too that combines both the phase 1 and the phase 2, 1 review. And the caveat is that you if you meet the specific aims of the phase 1, you can go ahead and move over to the phase 2 without having to go to review again. And then a direct to phase 2 program, which allows you to skip the phase 1. And that's assuming that you have all the data that you would have gotten under a phase 1 SBIR or STTR grant. And we do have a program called phase 2B, which is a continuation of a phase 2 award, something that we do offer companies that we have funded for a phase 2. And if you're interested in applying for that, always good to have a conversation with us about what you plan to do under the grant, as well as any budget you were proposing and the time that you're proposing to get these experiments done. So have a conversation with us around the phase 2B. And then phase 3 is typically commercialization. And always keep in mind that in most of the instances, NIH is never going to be the customer here, that you are going to be expected to graduate out of the program in some way, develop strategic partnerships, leverage the funding that you get through SBIR with other mechanisms that may exist out there, or also if you're lucky enough to get venture funding to move the technology forward. So let's go to the next slide.
The benefits. NCATS Small Business Programs Open Brace SBIR/STTR Close Brace. Stable and predictable. Not alone. Funds don't have to be repaid. Non-dilutive. IP rights are retained by the small business. Technical assistance to advance and commercialize technologies for public good. Projects undergo NIH's rigorous scientific peer review process, which awardees leverage to attract other funding and collaborations.
What are the benefits of the program? There are several. One is that it's stable and predictable because it's always linked to the NIH budget. If we have a budget, there will be an SBIR set aside that has to be awarded to U.S. small businesses. It's non-dilutive. The government does not take any IP or retain any IP that you develop. And once you're in the program, you do get access to some of the technical assistance programs that exist and commercialization programs, support that may exist through just by having an SBIR grant. And some of our panelists have actually taken advantage of some of these programs that exist through, that we allow our grantees to participate in, as because they're our grantees for this program. And another very important aspect of SBIR and STTR, that projects undergo NIH's rigorous peer review, and that peer review can be leveraged for potentially attracting other funding or collaborations as well. Let's go to the next slide. So,
translational science and research areas of interest. SBIR and STTR programs support NCATS mission to transform the translational science process so that new treatments and cures for disease can be delivered to patients more efficiently. Topics of interest. 1. Preclinical drug discovery and development. 2. Biomedical, clinical, and health research informatics. 3. Clinical, dissemination, and implementation research. 2021 to 2022 deadlines, January 5th, April 5th, September 6th.
I'll end this portion of the conversation by saying that NCATS is always looking for great applications to address translational bottlenecks that exist out there. We typically fund in 3 areas that I've listed here: preclinical drug discovery and development, tools and technologies, biomedical, clinical health, research informatics, tools and technologies, and clinical dissemination and implementation research technology. So if you're in one of those 3 broad categories, we encourage you to speak to us and see if it would be what you're proposing would be a good fit. The folks that are on this panel did that, and successfully were able to get an award. But it's always good to have a conversation with us to make sure that what you're doing really does fit our technology priorities. So I'll also say that if you want to get in touch with us, let's go to the next slide. Here are various ways that you can engage with us. You can send us an email if you have a specific aims page that you want us to
connect with. NCATS website, Mcats.nih.gov. Facebook, facebook.com/mcats.nih.gov. LinkedIn, linkedin.com/company/nih/. Twitter, twitter.com/mcats_nih_gov. YouTube, youtube.com/user/mcatsmedia. E-newsletter, mcats.nih.gov/enews. Listserv, bit.ly/1stoy5w.
Review prior to your submission. Please take advantage of the fact that we are here to help you and to guide you through the program. So I think with that, that concludes this portion of this discussion on just setting the stage of what SBIR is, what SBIR does. So I'd like to go ahead and introduce the panel now. As Monique mentioned, this month marks our 10th anniversary of harnessing the power of translational science to speed solutions for many diseases at a time. Our mission is to remove and bypass scientific and operational obstacles that stand in the way of getting more treatments to patients quickly. We do this by advancing what's called translational science. Translational science looks at the big picture to identify common pitfalls and develop innovative solutions, thus enabling promising discoveries and technologies to become real-world applications that improve people's health. Our activities, we hope, exemplify translational science principles, and they are boundary crossing, bold and rigorous approaches that help with the efficiency and speed of getting something to a patient. The NCATS SBIR STTR program plays an integral role in addressing the center's translational priorities. We recognize that U.S. small businesses are poised to play a significant role in addressing these translational bottlenecks that exist out there. And because we know that they offer innovative approaches and out-of-the-box solutions in addressing these issues. So with that, I am honored to present our panel participants to mark this auspicious milestone for NCATS and its SBIR STTR program. So I would like to introduce Chris Gibson. Chris from Recursion Pharmaceuticals, while he was still in graduate school, he developed an artificial intelligence based high throughput screening approach to screen thousands of drugs for use in treating rare diseases. Recursion is a clinical stage biotechnology company decoding biology by integrating technological innovations across biology, chemistry, automation, data science, engineering, with the goal of radically improving the lives of patients and industrializing drug discovery. Since its founding in 2013, Recursion has doubled its venture capital rounds, raising $239 million in 2020, and recently, this past spring, went public in a very auspicious milestone. Congratulations. I will go to introducing our next panelist, which is Dr. Lena Wu. Lena Wu is the co-founder and former CEO and president of Antabio. Lena co-founded Antabio to develop and market their proprietary Blaze system, an automated instrument that combines mass spectrometry with a type of protein imaging, streamlining and speeding up the characterization of protein structures for biologics and biosimilars drug production. In 2021, Antabio and its staff were acquired by SciEx, which is a large analytical technology company, which allows it to take and scale up their Blaze technology for global manufacturing, sales, and support. So a very different type of acquisition happened here. And then our last panelist or last person I'd like to introduce is Dr. Chang-Hee Kim, CEO of GoDX from Madison, Wisconsin. Chang-Hee developed a paper-based diagnostic test for digestive diseases. His company GoDX has since pivoted and with the same platform, developed a rapid test for COVID-19. Since the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic, GoDX has been specializing in delivering COVID-19 test results within 24 hours. GoDX, and I believe has clear approval to do this. So GoDX has an edge on other COVID testing sites in the Madison, Wisconsin area, because GoDX is both a testing site and a diagnostic laboratory. And I will get into more of what they're doing in this particular space. So that is our panel. And like I said, I'm very excited to introduce everyone. And I'm going to jump in and do a little round robin here of setting the stage of talking a little bit more about the technologies that these companies, that NCATS funded for these companies. So Chris, very briefly, and I'll pose this question to everyone else, very briefly, can you tell us about the technology that you developed under this NCATS SBIR grant? And specifically, what was the translational problem that you were trying to address with the technology?
Yeah, thanks, Lily. I really appreciate the invitation to be here. We've always thought of NCATS as our very first independent investor. So it's fantastic to be able to be back so many years later to talk about how that helped us so much in the early days. I did a dissertation in a lab at the University of Utah. And one of the projects we were working on was trying to understand a disease called cerebral cavernous malformation. And the lab had worked on this for a decade, and I came in as a bioengineering student and worked on it for a couple of years. And ultimately, we used a traditional molecular biology approach to hunt down what we thought was causing the disease, which was activation of a specific protein. And it turned out when we inhibited that protein in mice, we actually made them worse. So after a decade, this kind of reductionist approach to biology had failed. But what we noticed was that when we had modeled this disease in human cells, they looked really different in a microscope. And so what we did was use computer vision and machine learning to automate and unbias the ability to screen molecules against diseases using images of human cells. And so when you model a disease, cells look really different, and you can use a computer vision system to take a lot of the human bias out and measure all the ways those cells look different. And so a few months after we started that approach, we had two potentially new medicines and put those into mice. And both of those ended up significantly reducing the number of lesions in the mouse model. And in fact, Recursion is kicking off a phase 2 clinical trial of one of those drugs in human patients here just in the next quarter or so, which is really exciting.
Great.
What we came to NCATS with was essentially the idea to scale this. Could you take the same approach that we used in cerebral cavernous malformation And could you scale that across many different genetic diseases? And so that was the very first thing I did when we started the company, was sit down and write a direct to phase 2 SBIR grant, where we proposed to go from the one time that this had worked to explore whether or not this could work in a couple hundred other genetic indications. And we worked on that, and it was fantastic, and really appreciate that support. And I can talk more about how it helped us later.
That's great. So Chris, just so I might help our listeners too, when you put the grant together, were you did you branch out from the company, or were you still part of the University of Utah at the time? Can you tell us a little bit about the timing of putting the grant in and what you did? Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I was part of an MD PhD program, and I defended my dissertation on October 30th of 2013 and started the company 4 days later, licensed all of the know-how from the university over the following few weeks. And then the company was kicked off, or the SBIR grant, I sat down to start writing it January 1st of 2014. We submitted, I think, in April, something along that line. We got our score in July. And then, it took a little while to get the actual money, but we used that, as you said earlier, that summary statement as a really important proof point for some of the angel investors who followed on during those early years.
That's great. That's great. Thank you, Chris. And so I'm going to go to Lena now. Lena, could you give us a brief summary of the technology that was developed using the NCATS grant, and also addressing what the translational problem you were trying to solve with Blaze?
Yes. So again, like Chris, really have found NCATS was really important to Antabio's development, and so really appreciate the invitation to be part of this panel. So what Antabio was focused on is one of the biggest challenges in manufacturing biopharmaceuticals. So these are large, complex protein-based drugs like antibodies and vaccines. And one of the big issues is how do you ensure product quality? How do you ensure that the cells that are in the manufacturing workhorse are actually making the drug in exactly the way that you need it to? And any sort of structural change, even small ones in the structure of the protein, can have a really significant impact in terms of the efficacy and toxicity. So, and if you can't make the drug right, you can't test it in the animals. You certainly can't take it and test it into humans. So it's kind of a dead stop for the translation of drugs. So it's a really important analytical testing piece of information that can really affect go, no-go decisions for an entire program. So there are at the time, and there are today, 2 gold standard analytical assays. One's called capillary isoelectric focusing. It basically detects whether there's a structural change has occurred. And then the second test is mass spec. It characterizes the change in detail. Well, the problem is these 2 tests work great. The problem is it can take days, literally sometimes weeks, sometimes months to go from the detection to the characterization. It's a super complex workflow. So it ends up being a huge bottleneck in drug development. So what Antabio did was we decided to focus on addressing this bottleneck. We developed a rapid automated analytical assay that actually seamlessly integrated these 2 assays, the detection, the CIF to the mass spec. So it's now less than 30 minutes, completely automated, really fast. And compared to traditional workflows, basically it's 100x greater throughput, literally a fraction of the cost. And the most important is that now you can have a comprehensive analysis, a comprehensive understanding of the structure of your drug, and make these critical go, no-go decisions literally months and months earlier. So that has a really big impact on cost, likelihood of failure, and also time to market, time to that first in human study, for example. We actually applied to a fast track, so that combined phase 1 and phase 2. We applied for it at the end of sort of the end of our seed as we were looking towards our Series A. And I think similar to Chris's experience, it really helped us. We used it to sort of accelerate our product development. So we had a consumable that was a microfluidic chip. And early on, we were literally, it was plastic and we were literally gluing the pieces together ourselves. That's obviously not a commercializable manufacturing process. So we used the SBIR to help us develop a commercially compatible manufacturing process.
Got it. So that's how you were able to leverage the grant, was in this developing more of the manufacturing, right?
And that was and that was certainly the technical impact. But again, like Chris, it was a hugely important tool and very useful in terms of our acquiring and being able to get Series A investors to come in, helped us in partnering, because it's a huge mark of validation when you get a grant award, because you've been reviewed by your peers who are technical experts, and that really complemented a lot of the diligence that investors were doing. So I would hand out the grant, to all the investors, and they thought it was great to have this really concise, compelling summary, your value proposition, significance, the innovation. It was a really great diligence tool.
That's great. Thank you, Lena. And Chang-Hee, so let's talk about GoDX and where, what we funded, and maybe if you could concentrate also a little bit on the pivot that you made during the pandemic. I think that would be really an interesting insight on why you did it and what was the market opportunity there. So please tell us.
Photo behind Chang-Hee Kim of a blue and white minivan with the text, GoDX Mobile Lab COVID Testing.
Yes, so our vision at the GoDX, which stands for Go Diagnostics, is to democratize diagnostics, which means to empower all people to know their health now, instead of waiting for 1 week for a COVID test result. So we can do this by either bringing the lab to the people or developing a point of care or point of need diagnostics. So diarrheal disease is the second leading cause of death in children under age 5. And every year, 500,000 children die from diarrheal diseases. But if only we could develop a low-cost and rapid point-of-care test that can detect the major pathogens that cause the diarrheal disease, and it could help guide the therapy to appropriate drugs. So that was the translational gap we saw in our parent grant, is that the diarrheal disease is a huge problem in mortality, but there was really, and there were some technologies to detect DNA, but nothing really made into product. So we developed a very low cost and rapid method to extract DNA out of stool samples and then amplify those DNA and then detect it on strips of paper. So now we did a 400 patient sample clinical study with NCATS, and we are also planning to test this tool in Africa, in Kenya sites. And then the COVID hit in 2020, and we were almost forced to pivot because our clinical sites all stopped collecting stool samples because labs were just inundated with thousands of COVID samples, right? So we applied for supplement funding from NCATS, and then we were able to pivot to developing a rapid low-cost point-of-care test for the COVID using the same platform technology as in the parent grant. But now the FDA is actually was kind of translational block because you know, not that, I mean, they were working very hard, and it was easy to communicate with them, but they had a huge backlog of applications for the FDA EUA.
Mhm.
So everybody's probably still in the wait list. So the faster way to get the faster COVID results, we found was to go through the CLIA lab route, CMS route, and get this van CLIA certified, and then run our tests in the van. But this makes us possible to access testing deserts areas especially in the rural areas of Wisconsin, where the COVID is surging right now.
Yeah. Yeah. Very, very, very interesting. Yeah. It's interesting how that whole thing really, a lot of our grantees really did a pivot, had to do a pivot because of what was going on. And luckily for some of these platform technologies that NCATS funds, there was market opportunity there that they could pivot, right? Yeah. So Chang-Hee, I know that you participated in, once you got the phase 1 grant, I believe you participated in the I-Corps program that is offered to our phase 1 grantees. If they want to go through the training program, we'll pay you to go through the training program. Could you tell us a little bit about your experience with the I-Corps program and how that was a good thing to leverage at the time and how that informs you going forward?
Yeah, that's a fantastic program. It's very intense, like 10 weeks, and we need to interview 100 people, either customers or stakeholders, and we have 10 interviews a week. But the idea is to get out of the building, get out of the lab, talk to your customers, find out who your customers are. So you're developing a product that has a product market fit. Because the greatest fear is to make something that nobody buys.
Right.
So you want to talk to the customers first and find out how they do things now, and what their needs really are, and how you're going to develop the product that way.
Right.
So I thought it was incredibly helpful, and it really helped us with the commercialization plan when we applied for phase 2. And I believe that's how we got the phase 2. I mean, and we were able to do all the networking to get the support letters that we needed for the phase 2 grant application. So I highly recommend it, the I-Corps program.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And I also want to make a shameless plug here that the funding announcement is out on the street. So if you have a phase 1 grant and you're interested in going through the program, please check out the funding announcement, because again, we will pay you to go through the training because we think it's such a great opportunity. Chris, there were other things that you didn't participate in I-Corps, but you did use some of the opportunities to, I think, participate with some of the venture kind of pitches that we were able to arrange. Didn't your company do that as well too, right?
Yeah, we took advantage of lots of those opportunities, really, and it was a great chance for us to meet investors and practice our pitch and get feedback on what we could do better.
Right, right. So Lena, I can't remember, did you guys do the same thing too?
Yeah. So I actually participated in the I-Corps through an NSF, because we had an early NSF phase 1 grant, and I thought it was really useful. I actually, my wheelhouse is business development and marketing and commercial strategy. So I think when you do an NSF phase 1, you're required to participate, but coming from the lens of this is really important activity, I was actually really glad. I thought it was a well-run program. It definitely hits all the major themes and the interviewing is so critical. I would highly recommend anybody who has any kind of a chance of doing that kind of exercise. If you're a founder or an early technical, have an early technical position in a startup company, you need to do that, because it is very likely going to end up making or breaking your company. It's not so much the technology, It's how you think about the market and how you strategize for your go-to-market strategy. Because as a startup, you only get one shot at this. So you better make it work. And you need to understand how markets work and how to figure out product market fit.
That's great. Yeah, that's great advice. So I'm gonna deviate a little bit here. I am curious that if you could go back to yourself when you first put the grant together and said, oh, hey, I'm going to apply to NIH. What is there something you would have done differently or wish you would have had, or that maybe would have made the process a little easier, or maybe there was something that NIH could have done better? Chris, I'm going to start with you. Thinking back and getting that grant, what do you think you would have done differently, or what could NIH have done differently?
Lily, to be totally honest, there's a lot I wish I would have done differently as a new CEO, right? But there's actually not a lot that I would have changed about the work we did with NCATS. It was one of the most important and kind of foundational successes we had right when we kicked off the company. There was tremendous help from everyone at NCATS. Great insight doing it ourselves the first time. It can be a complicated process if you've never navigated, getting all the different, SAM. I can't even remember all the, all the different
a lot of registrations, right,
all of that. But
right.
Aside from some of the paperwork burden, which is not totally unexpected, we found our reception to be extraordinarily, helpful. And even you, Lily, were a great help to us, back then. So. I honestly would change a ton about the early days of Recursion, and there's so much I've learned and so much we did wrong. This is not one of those things. This is one of the things we counted as a huge success for the company.
Yeah. Lena, how about you?
So I would echo Chris's comments about how well run the program is, the SBIR program. So by the time I got around to applying for the NCATS SBIR, this was probably my 6th or 7th grant. And for a while I had 100% success rate, 4 out of 4, and now it's dropped off to about 80%. But I think, some of the advice that you mentioned early on is, a lot of scar tissue from those other grants. So one is definitely, if you have an idea early on, talk to the program lead, because it was so helpful, because we would have 2 or 3 different ideas for, what our project would be. And I remember very specifically your guidance in helping us hone and optimize the project for what NCATS was looking for. I also think that, one thing that a lot of companies, when they apply, don't think about is the letters of support. And Cheng-Hee, you talked about how important your I-Core work was to networking and identify support. I think you got to think about it this way. The reviewing committee is very good at the technical review, but it's hard to be an expert on every product, every market. And so those letters of support are for you to validate, to go out and say, look, I've talked to this customer and they say, yes, they want exactly this thing. And you have to provide that level of validation. Otherwise, it's not there, and it's very hard for the review committee to understand the impact and the significance. So of course, that's for the phase 2 or fast track, but it's really important to think about that and how do you use your letters of support. And it's for the product and the market, not so much the technology. I think that's a big differentiator from my perspective in terms of how well you position yourself for the NCATS phase 2.
That's great. That's great advice. Cheng-Hee, what about you?
Yeah, I echo Lena about talk to your program officer. I used to go to these HHS, the annual, SBIR conferences. And I highly recommend those if they come back or if they're being held virtually, because there's so much advice you can get from those. And then for first-time applicants to maybe look at examples of funded grants that are on the NIAID website, I think. Those would be very helpful.
Yeah, and actually there's more resources on that. There's been other institutes that have allowed that whose grantees have allowed them to put their grant applications on, successful grant applications online. So there's more to look at, right? So that's always nice. But I agree with you that it is a nice resource to get a sense of what NIH looks for when it comes to submitting these grants, because even within agencies, it looks different, right? What you may use at NSF may not necessarily work at the NIH, right? So looking at those samples are very important. Yeah, yeah. So I wanted to maybe focus a little bit on your specific experiences with your companies now, and what's going on, and maybe try to figure out how we could, you know, your pearls of wisdom to those that are listening on what state you're, you know, what stage you're in, things you've learned. I thought it'd be a great opportunity to do that. So I'm going to start with Chris. So Chris, I did mention early on that you guys just had an IPO, which was, you know, congratulations, quite a significant milestone, and something, you know, from my perspective as a program officer that I love to be able to tout out there is that, you know, our companies, you know, one of our companies did this. So could you tell us a little bit about more what that experience was like, what you learned, and how is this going to change you guys going into the future?
Yeah, happy to, Lily. So, you know, the IPO process is it's the first time I've been through it. Hopefully the only time I'll go through it. It's you know, it's a lot of work. We made the decision in about this time last year that it was the right time for Recursion to go public. And we made that decision because we felt like we had the right proof points to kind of exit the venture sphere with 4 programs in clinical trials and lots more programs in our pipeline. And also to access a broader set of investors who had, you know, different kind of horizon for investment. And because I think it creates and forces a lot of discipline on the team. And that's an important thing as you mature the company. So we went out in April, which was sort of just after the peak of the NASDAQ Biotechnology Index. It was a fantastic day for the team to kind of take a step back and reflect on everything that they've done. And then the next day we got back to work because we have a long ways to go and it's still very, very early in the trajectory of the kind of company that we're trying to build. You know, the only thing that I sort of reflect on having learned is at every stage of growth of the company, as a founder or CEO, you're faced with things you've never faced before unless you're a serial entrepreneur. You know, for me, operating as a public company is very different in some ways than as a private company. Talking to investors is very different. You know, you have to be much more cautious about all the things you say, and you have to have this giant list of things that you've said to the public and you're allowed to say to the public, and you always have to keep that separate from all the things that you know like the exciting things. So a great example of this is that yesterday we announced a really exciting collaboration for a decade in neuroscience with Roche and Genentech. And we've been working on that for a really long time, and you could never slip and let anybody know that was in process. Even inside the company, we have to be less transparent. So aside from about 15 or 20 people who were working on that deal, most of our nearly 400 employees were surprised yesterday morning when we called an all hands meeting, you know, for 8 a.m. to tell them more about the news that they had to read via a press release. So it creates a very, you know, different kind of situation in a company than when you're private. But I think it's a really good milestone for us, and, you know, on to the next phase.
That's great. That's great. No, and it's funny because I think, you know, when you think of a startup, you think of everyone knowing what's going on, right? And people wearing multiple hats. And in the example you gave, you know, it sounded a little bit like the federal government, where you find out about something the day that it's released and everyone's scratching their head going, I didn't see that coming. But yes, it's a really interesting juxtaposition to show where you guys were and where you are now, right? So that's interesting, very interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. And part of the idea is to set the team up for success, you know, so that even though they were surprised, many of them, by the news of the specific partner and the scale of the partnership, all of them knew about what the roadmap we were going to build at Recursion was over the coming 12 to 18 months with respect to neuroscience and oncology. And so our goals didn't really change, right? We had aligned for months what we wanted to build to kind of prepare for the partnership. And so the teams didn't feel overwhelmed. They felt some sense of relief that we had a fantastic partner to work with hand in hand on the work that they were already planning to do over the coming months.
That's great. Congratulations, by the way.
Thanks.
That's great news. Okay, Lena, so your situation is very different with your company and the fact that it was acquired by SciEx, is that right?
Correct.
So can you give us a sense of what that's like, you know, being a standalone company, you know, being approached and the whole negotiation of that and what role you guys are going to play moving forward under this arrangement?
Yeah, so I think, you know, the thing to realize is that while the M&A didn't really happen overnight, the actual first call to close of deal was less than 3 months, so that was fast, but it was based on a 3-year relationship that we had, you know, been working on from the very beginning of Antabio. So, you know, it started out with, we knew who our target companies were going to be for an M&A. And that was part of our exit strategy, our corporate strategy from the very beginning. And so we, you know, networked for introductions, warm introductions. And then we were able to secure a small pilot project. And then we went from that small pilot project to a funded multi-year development. And then that led to the M&A. And all along, even in between those big milestones of a collaboration and a funded development, there's a steady cadence of meetings that you're developing the relationship. You're getting to know the other party, their strategic goals, their weaknesses, their strengths, and also just human beings, right? Who's making what decision and how do they make that decision? So that's what really led to the M&A, and it helped us honestly to understand, you know, because at the time we were talking to all of the major mass spec companies and had collaborations of some sort, and it helped us really, I think, pick the best partner for Antabio. You know, startups, as we all know, startups are really good at innovation. We can take big risks. We can do the big projects, and big companies are good at building robust products, manufacturing, sales, and service. So, you know, when we thought about our exit strategy, we knew that, especially given the type of product we had, we were going to sell to pharma an analytical instrument that was making go, no go decisions about their billion-dollar drugs. Mm-hmm. So we could meet their technical requirements perfectly, but we would have been too big of a business risk. They would have never started using us, integrating us into their real drug development process and their real manufacturing process. So, you know, because we could disappear, we could suddenly not be able to supply, you know, the consumable, or we didn't have 24/7 sales and service. So, and you know, it ended up, and SciEx was the best partner because they had expertise in the 2 core technologies, the electrophoresis, isoelectric focusing, and the mass spec. They already had market presence, they had products, and they're really good at building robust instruments. They're really good at making robust consumables, and they have a sales and service global infrastructure. So, you know, our role going in was we brought the innovation, and that is still Antabio's role. We are now an R&D unit within SciEx. Mm-hmm. And, you know, we're still focusing on the innovative aspects and fine tuning and optimizing the assay itself, and the consumable, but things like the instrument, you know, we built the beta, but now, you know, we're working on handing that off to SciEx for, you know, the commercial manufacturing. And as soon as our, you know, consumable gets to that stage, we will hand that off to them too. So I think it's a really great partnership. And, you know, it's always was Antabio's goal to innovate, build something that addresses this bottleneck, makes a really big impact. But to get it out to the market, allow it to have the biggest impact that it can for drug development and biopharmaceuticals. And
Right.
by partnering with SCIEX, we can stay focused on what we're good at, and we let somebody else do what they're good at. And that turns out to be SCIEX.
Yeah. So what's the big change though from being, standalone,
Yeah.
Pounding the pavement, trying to find partners, now that you're
Yeah.
there, what do you see as the biggest change?
Biggest change. Well, so I have formally left the company Antabio and SCIEX because, okay, you don't need somebody to manage board. You don't need a CEO to raise money. And the decision making is obviously a lot more layered, a lot more complex. There's a lot more process. But that's something that I miss, but I can also see it's good for the company because robust manufacturing is all about process. The things that haven't changed are it's still important to maintain good relationships with the customers. Antabio focused a lot early on developing relationships with customers, and those early relationships are still being the core of development and marketing and validating the technology and the instrument and the data even now. So, it's not a fast-paced startup, but we wanted to mature the technology. We wanted to build a mature, robust product. So the focus is different. It's more about not so much innovating and creating new technology. It's about building a robust product. So that's a different technical focus.
Right. Great insight. Okay, Cheng-Hee, so you're in a different situation, and I know that you alluded to this early on in the thing about the frustrations that you had early on with the regulatory piece of this, especially during the pandemic. But it looks like you've rethought your strategy a little bit, and I remember you coming to me with a request for a supplement during the pandemic, and you rethought things a little bit in terms of a different approach that you wanted to go. I just was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about, your journey to where you are now, and where do you guys still need to go, and what would be the end game here for GoDX?
Yeah, we're the other kind of company that wants to go on forever. So we want to grow our revenue through our services and products. I think the COVID pandemic has really readied the market for us in terms of the need for democratic diagnostics. People know about PCR tests, and antigen tests, and people hear the diagnostics tests on the news. So we have some products in the pipeline, such as the STI test, which we have a grant, the NIAID grant for, and then also sepsis, and then antibiotic resistance detection. I think that will be a huge area also in the future. So we want to both do the CLIA lab service and innovative tests there, and as well as make products that are innovative and help us to democratize diagnostics.
Right. And Cheng-Hee, you brought up something that I want to make sure people glom onto, which is you have a platform technology, but you're utilizing other institutes to move certain aspects of the platform forward, which is exactly what we want to see happen with folks that are developing this kind of technology, is to leverage what NIAID may want versus what NCATS may want. And we've seen many of our platform companies do that. And I think that's something to keep in mind when it comes to, getting funding from the NIH. There's not necessarily just one institute that may be able to help you out in terms of building out a platform. depending on what you do, if you're going to be disease specific or organ specific, you may want to go to those respective institutes too. So I think you gave a great example of how to leverage that, with the other institutes. So that's great. That's great. So I want to make sure that we have a little bit of time for questions here. And I'm going to ask one last parting question. And, being that we are commemorating NCATS's 10th year, which is to me hard to believe that it's been 10 years. I want to know, like 10 years from now, whether, you're coming from your company perspective or from yourself, where do you see what you're working on to be, envision 10 years down the road? So Chris, I'm going to start with you.
Thanks, Lily. So, we've come a long way in the last 8 years since we started Recursion, almost a 10-year anniversary of our work. And I think we've got a few more decades to go before we fully realize the vision, which is, really to radically improve the lives of patients around the world. And, the way we see that happening is by using technology at every step of the drug discovery and development process to make it more efficient. As you know, today it costs about $2 billion worth of R&D investment to get one new medicine approved, if you kind of look at the industry as a whole. And it's our belief that with technology and an amazing team, we might be able to significantly lower that and also significantly broaden the types of diseases and the number of diseases for which there are really good medicines for. So a decade from now, I'm not known for being bashful on these things, but I imagine that we will be working on hundreds of medicines and have many new medicines to patients, and hopefully have a lot of drugs that are already making a huge difference in the lives of patients at that point, and ultimately driving down the cost of medicines as well, while building a really compelling business. So that's the vision that we have set for the future, and one that we're really excited to work on every day.
That's great. And I look forward to that too. I think we all do, right? So that's great.
We'll keep working. Thanks.
Yes. Lena, please.
So as I said, I'm no longer directly involved in Antabio and SCIEX. I'm still doing some consulting. What I would like to see though for the Antabio system, and that in 10 years time, the Antabio instrument is the gold standard for product quality. I think if it is, we have the opportunity to drastically reduce the cost of the standard drug development program by literally tens, maybe hundreds of millions of dollars, and speed these drugs to the market by years earlier. And so and we're talking about having an impact on 2/3 of the drugs that are in development today, because 2/3 of the drugs in development today are biopharmaceuticals. So that would be my hope for the product and the technology that we developed. For myself, right now, I'm what I would call a recovering CEO. So I don't know what I want to do next, but one of the things that is important to me is to encourage more women into entrepreneurship. I think we have a lot to contribute, and there's just not enough women involved, being CEOs, being on boards, being founders. And so that's something that I'm very interested in helping make happen.
That's great. That's great.
I'd like to see parity in 10 years for women.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I know that your mentorship in this area to other women, it would just go a long way. So kudos to you. That's great. It's terrific. Cheng-Hee.
Yeah, so our vision in 10 years is GoDX is selling these diagnostic tests in Africa and India.
Questions? ncats.nih.gov/smallbusiness. ncatsburster@mail.nih.gov.
We have a global health vision. So we need to get the low-cost point-of-care diagnostics out there where the health disparity is just huge, compared to like what's even in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
And we're really thankful that with NCATS, actually our grant was considered a rare disease, because in developed countries, children don't die of diarrheal disease. But in the developing world, like 500,000 children die of diarrheal disease like every year. So we want a sustainable business that can get the diagnostics out to the developing worlds.
That's great. It's a wonderful vision. Thank you very much. Okay, so Monique, I believe we're going to open it up for any questions from the audience.
That's right. And thank you, Lily, and thank you to our panelists here today. You have lots of nuggets of wisdom that we can all benefit from. I wanted to note, if you have questions, you can use the Q&A chat feature. We're going to proceed with the questions that we've received thus far. So one question is, as a small business, there are many things to focus on. You're trying to advance your research, but then you also have to think about approval and reimbursement and VC funding and marketing. How have you all balanced that?
Do we want to go in order here, or Monique?
Well, maybe let's start with Lena Wu, because you talked about some of the marketing experience that you had and how you're mentoring other companies.
Yeah, it's hard. It's definitely hard, but I think Chris spoke about it really well, in that, you really, and also Cheng-Hee has experience, you really can't develop your technology in isolation, because you don't know what you're developing. And before you start on that long, hard journey, make sure you validated that your goal is the right goal, that you define the product well, and that you're addressing a really important need. Because again, you only get enough money to try one thing, and that's got to be successful. So that, early marketing, early talking to customers has got to be the activity that guides your research and development. It's a tension, that is for sure. But if you don't have that tension, I'd say you're in trouble. I mean, Chris and Cheng-Hee, what do you guys think?
Yeah, Lena, I'm highly aligned with what you just said. The other thing that I spend a lot of time focusing on, even today, is hiring and building the team. Yeah. So in the early days, that's it's a much smaller team than it is today. Mm-hmm. But hiring an extraordinarily good person who has familiarity with that area that you need to work in, and then setting them free to go deliver against that, and is the most powerful thing that you can do. And it's the only way you can scale in my kind of estimation. So I spent a lot of time in those early days finding other really smart folks who could teach me and could guide the company on some of those things where I had no experience whatsoever. And then I learned a ton from them over the last several years. So that's one of the other things I'd add.
I think picking the correct strategic advisors can help you, picking board members who've been through it, because if you've never been through it, it is hard to prioritize, and you've got to be super rigorous about prioritizing. That's what gives you enough time to do the things you have to do. You cannot do everything at once. So getting help and advice and thinking through your problems with somebody who can help you prioritize enables you to do the things you have to do. The right answer is not to do everything. The right answer is to prioritize, get help prioritizing if you don't know how, and then you can get stuff done. You get the important stuff done.
That's great.
Thank you.
Yeah.
If you've had experience with the I-Core, how did you use those lessons to fine-tune your future applications, and did the learnings change your budget allocations?
I think Cheng-Hee should answer that.
The I-Core, it was very helpful. I don't think I could have, applied for the phase 2 grant without the I-Core. It's a lot of time invested, but the return is really good. And you don't want to be working in the wrong direction. So that's why you want to follow what the customer is going to want to buy or need. So, well, what's the question about budget allocations?
Did you have to change your budget allocation when you pivoted?
Yeah.
And when in a, because because of the information you got, did you have to change anything in your grant?
Yeah, I mean, I think there were some differences in which pathogens we're going to go after, but it was within the scope of the original aims.
Yep.
So I just got that approved through Lily, and that was fine.
Lily and many other people. I just want to
Yeah.
mention.
Maybe I'll be on this call.
I wish I wielded that much power, but I don't. But yes, yeah, right.
Yeah.
Thank you. I was just going to note that we have we have some awardees on the line, but we also have some early time folks who are thinking about applying in the first place. So do you have any of your top tips for someone who's thinking about getting into the program, and was it worth it for you?
Yes, definitely worth it. Read the instructions carefully. Think about your, and it, especially if your first time, this is not an academic grant. So, you need to adjust your mindset. So don't assume, you've written many other grants. This is different. So read the instructions, and there is a lot of really good advice and examples. What you should be trying to talk about, what you should be trying to prove in terms of the innovation, the significance, the letters of support. Again, do your research, acquire all the data, use your scientific skills and do that research and look at the examples to best position yourself, and then go talk to the program heads, get help. It's the NIH, all these programs are super helpful. Reach out, take advantage of that feedback early.
Right. That's great advice.
Yeah, and be very persistent.
Yes.
Be prepared to resubmit. Because a lot of times you don't get the score that's fundable, and you can resubmit, and NIH gives you feedback from the peer reviewers. So oftentimes people succeed the second time. I think you really need to believe in your vision and be persistent. It's key. Yeah.
I think also one of the big differences, perhaps in terms of thinking about academic versus SBIR, is academic, when you write a grant, there's a lot of shooting for the moon. Whereas, the SBIR grants, I think, are a little bit different in that you have to be very pragmatic and very rigorous about proposing a project that the work can get done in the time and resources you ask for.
That's right.
It doesn't help you to go shoot for the moon, because then it's like, well, we're going to give you $250,000 and you're only going to complete 20% of what your project is. That's a failed project.
Right.
So that's one example of the change in mindset.
That's a great example, Lena. I think you drive home that point about the differences between standard investigator initiated type grants that NIH funds versus what you would expect for an SBIR. So yeah, totally agree.
I mean, the other difference is you need to show innovation over what's in the market already. So you need to know what your competition is, and differentiate yourself. Otherwise, why should they give you the money, right?
Right.
So that's very important.
All right. Our last question is: folks are thinking about understanding the fast track application, and so they're saying, "I understand it combines phase 1 and phase 2, but how do we decide if we should go for a phase 1, phase 2, or go straight to the fast track?" Can you elaborate? And Lola, that may be a question for you.
Yeah. So I think the best piece of advice regarding making one decision versus another is I do think that it's advisable when you're submitting a fast track to think about if you have some data, preliminary data that maybe could support the assumptions of that you're making, just not in just the phase 1, but potentially what you're going to be doing in the phase 2. That's what we advise our grantees to think about it from that perspective. What data do you have that would set you up to, be seriously considered for not just the phase 1, but the phase 2? And Lena, you guys did go for a fast track, right?
Yeah, and we had that very same decision. Do we just apply for a phase 1 or do we apply for the fast track? And we put together a little presentation. We mapped out the 2 different scenarios. We explained what our existing data was. And we brought it, actually, I don't think I met with you. I think I met with somebody else from NCATS, but they're like, oh, you should do the fast track. You have enough here, So again, go talk to a program manager. Don't make the decision by yourself. Go ask the expert. The other thing that helped us is that we had done, like you said, we had done a fair amount of work to really help both validate our phase 1 proposal and the phase 2. And we had a lot of the information around the corporate strategy and the commercial plan. We had that in place too. So it was, for us to be able to write a commercial plan, it was a lot more straightforward since we'd figured out a lot of that stuff for the company itself.
Right.
Some of you have talked about not being funded the first time and perhaps dealing with rejection initially, but still coming back and resubmitting. For folks who need that inspiration, any final parting words?
I think you really need to believe in your vision and be passionate. So, and then get yourself out there, because if you don't go to the bat, you're not going to hit that home run, right? So, I mean, I put myself out there. I went to a Shark Tank pitch competition at the American Gastroenterology Association. And I never did such competition before, but I was really pleasantly surprised. I won the whole competition. Yeah. So, and then I did another one at the Tropical Medicine Conference and came in 2nd place. So, I think it's important to believe in your vision and get yourself out there. That's my advice.
That's great. Yep. All right, well, I think we're gonna wrap things up, and I want to thank Chris, Lena, Chenki for your time today. Really appreciate it, and for the audience for hanging in there. I think it was a great discussion and a wonderful way to commemorate our 10 years that we've been running this program out of NCATS, and hopefully 10 more years as well too, right? Maybe not necessarily with me, but 10 more years. So yes.
Congrats, Lily. To you.
All right. Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
This has been a great program, really super important for many entrepreneurs. So thank you for doing this and for doing such a great job at leading the organization.
Great.
It's been important. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And I wish everyone happy holidays and a very happy new year as well too. So thank you.
Everyone.
Thank you.